All right. Well, welcome, Emmy. We are so happy to have you here. We've got Dr. Emmy Van Dorzen, and would you just tell people a little bit about who you are for those who might be unfamiliar, um, who you are and what you do?
Sure. I am an existential therapist, and I have called myself that since 1973 when I first started working in psychiatric hospitals. I was born in the Netherlands and grew up in the Netherlands, and then I moved to France when I was 18 to study first philosophy and then psychology. And after 7 years in France, I was invited to come work in London with what was then called the anti-psychiatrists.
Mm.
And from there on, so that was living in a therapeutic community and working in a crisis center and really going into a much more alternative way of working with people who had emotional problems. And of course, after learning all this for 8 years, I then started teaching and at Antioch University, in fact, in London and in various other places, and then was able to set up my own training courses and have created the new School of Psychotherapy and Counseling, which works with Middlesex University, as well as the Existential Academy, where you can do non-academic existential therapy training. I have published 20 books to date, all about existential topics or about psychotherapy, counseling, coaching, pastoral care, all those sorts of things.
Yeah. So for listeners in the United States, existentialism and existential therapy are not often as popular as I wish they were. So, could you give a little background into what it is and for people who are unfamiliar?
Yeah, well, that's not surprising because a lot of the existential ideas come from continental philosophy. So I base most of my work in philosophy, and that's based on sort of Socratic dialogue, but also in phenomenology, which
Mhm.
is an alternative to the exact sciences, a way of combining. Um, Physical science with social sciences, really, and to explore what is actually happening for people and what consciousness is in a kind of systematic, structured way in order not to just be interpretive, but to be in touch with what is actually happening for a person and what it might mean. So my work is based in philosophers like Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, Jean-Paul Sartre, Simone de Beauvoir, Albert Camus, Maurice Merleau-Ponty, all these kinds of continental philosophers.
Mhm.
But there is also an American version about all this. You have in America had people like Paul Tillich and Rollo May and Irv Yalom and now Kirk Schneider and Louis Hoffman, who are all practicing existential therapy as well and who are part of a worldwide existential movement
Yeah.
where we try to bring a bit of wisdom into all these disciplines in order to help people with their daily troubles without having to diagnose them with mental health disorders and to kind of give them back their own power to understand what has gone wrong and to make changes in their lives that make them feel much more at ease than they have ever been.
Yeah. And so as I'm listening to you, I'm hearing you say that there's something that existential philosophy and therapy has to offer today's people. And maybe some of it is cutting to a truth that they can grab onto about what is this experience they're having. Maybe maybe this is the way life is. Maybe we've been fed lies by things
Well,
in the world.
there is a lot of deception and also a lot of self-deception going on. So
Mhm.
it's very true that it is important for people to start thinking about things in a new way and to have access to that, to learn to do that, to figure out how they can check the facts and do a bit of research, not just in theoretical terms, but in terms of what they're actually experiencing in the world and what is really going on with other people. So it is about learning to discipline yourself, to just take the time to figure things out instead of jumping to conclusions too quickly and
Mm,
end up basically believing what everybody else believes and just going along with what is currently in vogue, you know?
mm. I see a lot of that, and I think because our media is so pervasive and so quick and easy, I notice it seems like anxiety in some ways, at least I work with college students, anxiety has kind of replaced depression as the primary struggle that they feel. I'm kind of curious what you've noticed and why you think that
Well,
might be.
if you've noticed that, that makes me optimistic because, from an existential perspective, anxiety is seen as a sign of life. It means that you're wakening up
Mm,
to something new, to something different, that you feel ill at ease with the way things are, and that you feel this new vibration, this resonance with something that makes you want to check your facts and learn a little bit more. So it is all about you sensing that there is a new energy
mm,
inside of you and that that new energy will be exactly what you need in order to face up to what is going astray in your life or what you haven't yet figured out. It is the kind of energy, that anxious energy, that gets you to step forward and to step up to the plate and be challenged by life and listen to what life may be asking of you again. And you need a bit of anxiety to do that because it is when we let ourselves be dulled down
mm,
into a kind of non-thinking state of mind and we distract ourselves and we amuse ourselves and we just try to have fun or be happy and we don't feel anxiety or depression. It is when we do that that we are most estranged from
mm.
ourselves and from what is possible for us in this life.
Wow, that is such an interesting sort of way of reframing anxiety from how most people perceive it.
Oh,
Most people see it as something to avoid, and I'm hearing for you, no, this is a sign of something to embrace.
absolutely.
Hmm.
Absolutely.
Um, One of the things I'm curious about, and I notice throughout your books, is sort of um, helping people make peace or embrace sort of these tensions they're experiencing, maybe between security and freedom or connection and independence. And you write about these different pairs of opposites that people experience. And I think this is such a profound idea, because people often just think in very concrete terms of this is good, this is bad. I like this, I don't like this. And you frame it in a different way. And if you could kind of talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, I call that working with paradox.
Hmm.
And I speak about it in terms of learning to allow the tension between these apparent opposites. And what often comes to you as a conflict or as a tension in your life, and what you have learned to cut through by thinking that you need to aim for the positive side of that conflict. So people will be chasing happiness and avoid sadness. But actually, it is demonstrably true that people who are capable of feeling both happiness and sadness are people who are just more alive and who are feeling in depth and therefore do this thing that I was talking about earlier, which is awaking to your life and coming to life, as I like to think of it, beginning to properly live and get to know yourself and get to know human existence. And you know, most people are sensitive to that idea because they know they cannot avoid the negatives. They know from experience that those happy moments where you feel high and on top of the world, you can predict that within hours something will happen that will bring you right back down.
Yes.
And instead of being afraid of that or dreading it or trying to avoid it by taking happy pills or by hiding away, it is much more productive to learn to see that this is how life works. It's cyclical, and you will be confronted with all these different experiences. And that holding on to that tension is really the recipe for a better life, because we know that the more we give and the more we will get. And we know that the only thing you cannot change is the fact that things will always change. Change is constant. So we know, and we know we can't resist anything but temptation. And that the more you know that you don't know. You know, there are all these paradoxes that are built into our lives and that we are aware of, but we don't think it through, and we don't realize that this is an essential wisdom that defines how much we can allow ourselves to really be alive and to really be aware of how we can do more with ourselves, with each other in the world.
What happens when I'm kind of curious what happens when a person intentionally chooses to do what you're saying versus when they say, "No, I want to instead of that, I want to be safe."
Well,
Kind
the
of curious.
first thing that happens is that they stop thinking that they're mentally ill. They start realizing that all these so-called symptoms are very often just ordinary parts of being confronted with the difficulty of being human and living a human existence. And moreover, the difficulty of living a human existence in the pressurized civilization that we all live in at the moment. That's the first thing that happens. So there is an easing and there is a growing awareness that you are more competent and stronger than you ever thought you were. And then you begin to see that you're only just beginning to learn what life is really like, and that learning to live is a very satisfying thing to do. And that the more you learn, the better you get at it. And the better you get at it, the more you want to learn, and the more you want to share it with other people and pass it on. And that really life is possible again. And it is not something to fear, but something to come to terms with, to get to know, to play with. It is an adventure. It is something that you can have fun with. and something that will make you stronger as you face more troubles and more difficulties.
I'm curious about that life being something to play with. I'm curious if you've ever had experiences where that seemed especially true.
Oh, certainly, certainly was. Yes, yes, I've been through very difficult times in my life. When I was 17, I was suicidal and attempted to take my life several times. And the way I came out of that was really because there were wise people around me who, instead of diagnosing me with mental illness, reminded me that it wasn't all about, the things I thought I had to focus on, that I was entitled to write my songs and play my music, and that maybe other people might actually have an interest in that. That I was entitled to have political opinions and that I could have my voice heard and I could make a difference in the school, that I could write poetry or sing in the choir, and that I could enjoy those things instead of just focusing on schoolwork and on grades and getting more and more upset and depressed and feeling isolated because my boyfriend had ghosted me.
Mm.
All of those negatives had become not just the foreground to my life, but had become the whole of my life. And what I learned was that there were a lot of good and beautiful things in the world that I could learn about and be part of, and that I could enjoy, and that I could live in a very different way, which is exactly why when I finished my high school exams after that at 18, I went hitchhiking with a girlfriend all around France, and we played music in restaurants and we earned our keep just doing that. And that I also decided to go study in France and that I wanted to have a very different kind of life than I had had in the Netherlands. For starters, move from quite a cold climate to the south of France where the sun was shining much of the time, and just be in a very different culture, learn new things, and obviously enjoy a lot of that. Eat fantastic French food and drink fantastic French wine. It was about exploring a different lifestyle. That's what I learned very early on.
So something almost magical, not in a supernatural sense, but just in a like a awe or curiosity sparking sense happens when you shift your focus to exploration and meaning seeking. Howard.
So true, so true. So when you discover that there is a lot to learn in the world and there is a lot that you don't know yet, and you allow your childlike curiosity to guide you a little bit more, and you realize that the more stuff you find out about the world and the more you link it all together, the more you create or recognize, perhaps, the framework of meaning that helps you not just make sense of things, but also find fulfillment and satisfaction in your life. And that comes from that exploration and that trust in your curiosity and your capacity to learn and understand.
And I'm hearing a paradox in there, right? Like that,
Mhm.
we want to be adults, we want to be so certain in who we are and what we know, and yet maybe the path out is to be more childlike and curious,
Certainly more playful
certainly more
and,
playful. Yeah.
and less taking ourselves less seriously. And
Yeah.
although we take life seriously, we don't have to take ourselves quite as seriously. I think that is the best way, the best combination. Be extremely serious about life and finding truth, but being extremely light on your feet
Mm.
about who you are, and be aware that you can be many different things, and that over the years, over the decades, you will become very different, and you will discover new sides to yourself and new possibilities that you cannot even imagine yet.
Mm. And how does one begin that process of taking themselves less seriously? Because so many of us are guarded, and if something attacks any aspect of our identity, we want to defend it and argue and put our feet firmer on the ground that we're in, and that can be a challenge.
It is always a challenge. I call it the Copernican revolution because, when Copernicus realized that it wasn't the sun turning around the earth, but the earth turning around the sun, nobody would believe him at first.
Mm.
And when you come to that situation in your own life, it's hard to believe. You have to spend probably at least 18 years of your life affirming yourself,
Mm.
establishing a sense of who you are, and learning to believe in yourself and taking yourself terribly seriously and
Yeah.
establishing an identity. But then the next task is to realize that it is not all about you, and that really it turns around life and not about your life.
Mm.
And that therefore, to be a bit lighter about that and to allow your identity to be challenged is a good thing, because this is how you find the freedom back. And the freedom comes when you let your identity be loosened up a bit. Because if your identity and your sense of who you are and what you must do in the world is very strong and very tight, then it will seem like a catastrophe when it is challenged. But if you make a bit more room and you have other strings to your bow, and you have other arrows in your quiver,
Mhm.
then it doesn't matter if your identity is challenged, because that may just be the opportunity for figuring out some other potential that you haven't developed yet. And it may just be the moment where you discover the secret of something you've never investigated yet.
Sure.
When there is doubt in your life, it means that you're opening things up a bit and you're questioning and self-questioning,
Mm.
and that is the beginning of this process of finding out more about how life actually works and not taking yourself quite so seriously, but really starting on this process of transformation that is a lifetime for everyone.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there with
Mhm.
what you just said. I heard several important things. One, that for young people, affirming yourself and solidifying a sense of self is really important.
It is.
And then the next phase of maturing involves maybe allowing that secure self to be challenged more.
Yep.
And I was hearing echoes of self-affirmation theory, and these thoughts of how we need to compensate for our sense of self in one area by having multiple areas that we feel secure in.
Mhm.
It makes a lot of
Yeah,
sense.
it links to that very well. Yeah.
Um, Kind of relatedly, I'm curious about the importance of personal values and understanding the things we find most important and guides for our life, and how you make sense of values.
Mm. Well, in this paradoxical way, always, in the realization that if, it's even true for life itself. I mean, I would say life is very important to all of us, but we cannot truly value life unless we also allow for the awareness of death.
Mm.
So once you realize that life and death go hand in hand and you cannot have one without the other, you realize it's not all about life. It is about putting life in perspective with its temporal nature and with the fact that sometimes you will be ill and you will be confronted with failure and you will be confronted with limits all the time. And then you can have a different kind of value around it, a value that is more mobile, more flexible, more in flow. So, for instance, your value becomes not life or youth, but maybe vitality instead. So this is a form of play with these concepts as well. And it is about bringing in the light and the dark. So same with relations, for instance, instead of thinking I have to be loved, I have to belong, I have to be appreciated on the one hand, and fearing isolation or being alone, you learn over time that actually, while love is really important, you can only really truly learn to love and be loved if you have first learned not to be afraid of loneliness.
Mm.
And you have learned that it doesn't have to mean isolation. It can mean coming to terms and appreciating and valuing solitude. And it can also mean having more understanding of other people's position because you've come to terms more with you as a person on your own. So you can also see the other in a much clearer light and have much greater appreciation and understanding for how they might be struggling with their everyday existence. And as you improve on that, a loving relationship becomes much more possible.
When I work with college students and I have two high school age kids,
Mm,
and so they give me observations of the world too, and I learn all sorts of things from them.
mm.
One of the things we've noticed is people are really connected online and they text each other, they Snapchat and Instagram and all this other
They
stuff.
sure do.
Yeah, and they like it and it connects them in a way, and yet
Mm.
we know from the research that people are rating themselves as lonelier than ever.
Yeah.
How do you make
So
sense
that's
of that?
another
Yeah,
paradox, isn't it?
right.
They become less physically present with each other
Hmm.
and more used to being intimate with each other by talking online with each other. So it's a different quality of relating. And
Yeah.
rather than us panicking about that and thinking, oh my God, they're more lonely, what they're actually, I think, doing is becoming more aware of their loneliness than
Hmm.
we were when we were more physically connected up to each other. And we had less of this intellectual, emotional, this articulated conversation going on with each other.
Hmm.
We were more in the, playing ball games or sitting around with each other. Now it focuses more deeply in a way on what is actually going on and on analyzing that process. So we gain something and we lose something. And obviously, to have both, as always, would be a good objective.
Mm.
So to bring back in some more physical activities that are shared, but not to lose out on this amazing new layer, of deeper, more articulated, and much wider ranging contacts online which are also taking people beyond their horizon if they want to,
Right.
which is they get connected up to people in other cultures much more. They
Yes.
can be connected to people all around the world. Well, isn't that an amazing game?
Yeah, we wouldn't have this conversation if that weren't possible.
Exactly, Dan.
Yeah. Yeah, I that's fascinating. So from an existentialist perspective, this loneliness means maybe that they're just more aware of a fundamental truth
I think
that
so,
was there
because
all along.
fundamentally we're all alone.
Right.
But, sometimes we ignore it, sometimes we pretend it isn't happening. In the past, people have sometimes kept so busy with other people that they never got around to realizing this.
Yeah.
Now, when you're online, you're with yourself as well as with the other. I personally think that's part of a process of human evolution towards greater grasp of what we are doing as human beings. But there are risks with it, and those risks need to be attended to.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
physical connection needs to be re-stimulated, I think, in lots of ways, re-stimulated by introducing college kids to older people in care homes, or, you know, be in touch with the reality of aging, be in
Yes.
touch with the reality of walking rather than just going in cars, with the reality of touching other people in non-sexual ways, with the reality of doing projects together that take physical effort and energy, and the exhilaration that comes out of that. Figuring things out in nature, in a group of people, all those things that, we did naturally in the 50s and 60s because everybody thought that is how you raised kids, have fallen away, and I do think that is a loss. But what we didn't have and they have now, this amazing medium to connect at that other level and to learn so much stuff that we had to go find in an encyclopedia, which was a heavy thing that, not everyone even had at home. My
Yeah.
goodness me, they're so privileged in so many ways.
Yes.
Let's not panic about them.
Well, and that is an interesting thing. You use the word privileged in that I sometimes notice that people who are very privileged often have some of the same problems of people without much privilege in terms of um you'd think they would be happy, the happiest there is, but often that's not the case.
No, well, we know that, don't we? From the big Harvard 80-year research project, we know full well that although money, for instance, will give you advantages only up to a certain level, after that level is reached, it becomes probably a hazard rather than an advantage, because it gets you out of touch with other people. It makes you take things for granted and all sorts of things. What does matter greatly, we know from that research, is how well people are connected to each other. And those people who have warm family relations and warm neighborly relations, where they can rely on neighbors and build good networks and have good communities to be a part of, those people really thrive much, much more than the ones that haven't got that. So we know more and more about how we can even out those circumstances to give everybody access to these very basic things, which shouldn't ever be a privilege, but should be standard for all human beings, as they probably were once upon a time.
Yeah. Um, I'd kind of like to, I'm aware of the time. I'd kind of like to
Mm.
shift a little bit and ask a few fun questions.
Okay.
Some of the ones I've been asking very life is serious questions, and here's just a few. So for people maybe to get to know you a little bit, um, kind of curious, favorite philosopher to read on a rainy day?
Hmm. I'm quite fond of Karl Jaspers at the moment. I think he's much underestimated. But on a rainy day, it would have to be a philosopher who wrote some novels. So
Mhm.
probably a novel by Sartre or Simone de Beauvoir would be a good place to start, I would say.
That sounds great. Um, what do you think are some overrated
Uh-huh.
self-help ideas that are prevalent that you see?
Hmm. Where do I start?
Yes, this could be a long one. There's a
It's
lot,
a
aren't there?
long one. Well, I would say forget about all these things that diagnose you with a lack of wisdom to the diagnosis. And obviously, there is room for clinical psychology to do
Sure.
careful work and work out when something's really gone awry and carefully test people and all of that. But the pop psychology, that things that can put people into all these categories and then damn them for it, that is a
Right.
terrible thing. So concepts like narcissism or all these personality characterizations, be very, very cautious with them because all you're doing is creating separation and division between yourself and other people. And you, instead of approaching the other, are putting them down in a very hateful way, which is not based on true knowledge much of the
Mm.
time. Obviously, it's very different if it is based on deep and long knowledge, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the cheap and cheerful labeling of other people.
Right. He's a
It's
narcissist.
one
She's
of my
a nar
bugbears. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we see that sort of narcissist it has become a catch-all for I don't like that.
Oh, it means nothing anymore.
Right.
It means a person who is a bit, too into their self-interest. Well, as I said earlier, when you're a teenager, you may have to be a little narcissistic. And when you work, as you very well know, I'm sure, when you work with a 17 or 18 or 19-year-old who doesn't have that kind of narcissism and is
Mm.
full of woe and self-doubt and have what we used to call in the old days a complex of inferiority, then you're thinking, give me a little narcissism, allow this person to become a little bit more sure of themselves and a little bit more pushy with other people.
They
It's
used to call
all
that
about
healthy.
the
Yeah.
greed, isn't it?
They used to call it healthy narcissism. Yeah.
Yeah. People forget about that, indeed. And,
Uh-huh.
Freud talked about the importance of primary narcissism in babies. Without that, you can't become a person.
Right. It's an important step.
So it's all about keeping the balance in life. It's all about seeing where that tension lies and playing with that.
So just two more fun questions and then we'll start to wrap up. Uh a person from history, alive or dead, who you'd like to sit down and have a drink with.
There's no doubt in my mind about that whatsoever. That would be Socrates. I
Mm.
would love to have a long conversation with Socrates and to talk about wisdom and to talk about sophism and people pretending to be wise when they're not really wise at all and how we know so little. I would love that. But
Yeah.
if it had to be a woman, then I would quite like to meet Joan of Arc.
Mm. Yeah. Such a mystery surrounding what it would be like to be in the same room with her.
Yes.
Yeah. No, that's a
It
great
would
one.
be very interesting indeed. Yeah.
And then this is a question I ask every guest. You've done a lot of different things, philosophy, therapy, music. You've lived in a lot of places. If you couldn't be a philosopher, therapist, professor, all these other things, um, and had to do it all over again with a completely different path, what might you try?
I'd love to be a film director.
Oh, say more.
Well, I was involved in making a film. I wrote the script, in fact, for a film you can find on my YouTube channel for the existential movement. So just put in existential movement, bringing wisdom to the world, and you'll find the movie. And I loved that process so, so much. But more so, I would love to actually write novels and then put them into a film and really show how things feel and how they are experienced rather than just talking about things, you know? Too much verbosity can
Mm,
kill your understanding of what something is really like. And of course, when I write my songs and I bring together the lyrics and the music, then I create the YouTube video for the song when I've recorded it, then I really, really love that. I so enjoy taking little film clips throughout the weeks that I'm recording my new song and then trying to find the right images to illustrate what I was trying to sing about.
yeah, that's really cool. Well, my experience of interviewing you was similar to some of my experience of when I've read your books, where I'll have to go back and reread or re-listen because there's things that I thought about at one level that I want to go back and think about on another level. And there is a great depth to your thought and the work that you've done, and I really appreciate having you on the show.
Well, I've really enjoyed talking to you, Dan. It's been really nice. I like your combination of serious and playful as well. Very much in line with what we're talking about.
Yeah,
Thank
well, I was glad we could have you on. Thank you so
Yeah, well,
much.
thank you for a great conversation. I will put it on my YouTube if you don't mind.
Of course.
Great.